Hello and welcome everyone to our event this afternoon, Fictions, Health and Care Reimagined. I am Josephine Magnusson and I am the Senior Research Officer at Future Care Capital. This is just the order for our event this afternoon, so we're going to be doing a panel discussion before we're moving into a Q&A. But first of all, I would like to introduce Future Care Capital. We are a 70-year-old charity who have Her Majesty the Queen as our royal patron. Our vision is to see all of those in receipt of care benefit from a functioning and fit-for-purpose health and care system. And in order to achieve that, we focus on three key areas of action. We work with and influence policymakers through our FCC proprietary research. We work with and support health and care practitioners, bringing together FCC and others' research through projects and initiatives in order to create a debate. And we also put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, by investing and partnering for social impact. This event today is a combination of 1 year's work. We started in July last year when we started publishing one story per month, addressing near future scenarios in health and care. And these stories have now been compiled into an anthology that you will be able to download from our website. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that towards the end of our event. Future Care Capital have a particular focus on data, technology and innovation as it relates to health and social care. And public attitudes and the growing use of data and technology in every aspect of our lives are fast changing. At FCC, we seek to support policymakers and practitioners and, crucially, our beneficiaries to navigate these developments in relation to health and care. There are, of course, many possible futures. Some scenarios we encounter in the course of horizon scanning can inspire life-changing advancements, whereas others might seem a bit more dystopian and outside of our regular comfort zone. Storytelling has been used throughout history to engage people's imagination, to facilitate a sense of culture and community, and to pass down tales from the past and explore possible futures. Fiction engages the brain in a different way to reading facts. It can facilitate a better understanding of other people and can help us see the world from different perspectives. It can be a way of opening conversations about difficult topics, taboos or stigmas in a non-threatening way. Science fiction routinely draws inspiration from technology, as well as inspiring technological advancements in its own right. So we wondered, could it help people to explore the ways in which a range of new technologies might shape health and care futures? Could it bring to life some of the leading edge work underway around the world to transform how we approach illness and empower people to live independently for as long as possible? We decided to find out. So I'm going to introduce our panelists today, and then we move on to our discussion. I would encourage you to put questions in the Q&A box that you will see, and we will get to them in the last part of our event. And if you have a question for a particular person on our panel, then please name them in your questions so we know who to address them to. I'm going to introduce our speakers now, and I'm going to start with Keith Brook, who has acted as the editor of this series over the last year. Keith's first novel, Keepers of the Peace, appeared in 1990, and since then he has published 8 more adult novels, 6 collections, and close to 100 short stories. For 10 years from 1997, he ran the web-based science fiction, fantasy, and horror showcase Infinity Plus, featuring the work of around 100 top genre authors. His most recent novel, Harmony, which was published in the UK as All Human, is a big exploration of aliens, alternate history, and the Fermi paradox, and it was shortlisted for the Philip K. Dick Award. Liz Williams is a science fiction and fantasy writer living near Glastonbury, where she is also the co-director of a witchcraft supply business. She has been published by Bantam Spectra and Tor Macmillan, and her work appears regularly in Asimov's Science Fiction and other magazines. She is the secretary of the Milford Science Fiction Writers' Workshop and also teaches creative writing. Her novel, Banner of Souls, was shortlisted for the Philip K. Dick Award, along with 3 previous novels, as well as the Arthur C. Clarke Award. Her story, Infectious, which she wrote for our fiction series, was included in the Best of British Science Fiction 2020 anthology. Stephen Palmer is the author of 17 genre works, including Memory Seed, Glass, Beautiful Intelligence, Tommy Catkins, and The Conscientious Objector. His short stories have been published by Wildside Press, Spectrum SF, Newcom Press, Solaris, PS Publishing, and others. And in 2019, Newcom Press published a collection of short stories, Tales from the Spired Inn, which was set in the world of Memory Seed. Anne Charnock is the author of 4 novels, including Dreams Before the Start of Time, which was the winner of the 2018 Arthur C. Clarke Award. Her debut novel, A Calculated Life, was a finalist for the 2013 Philip K. Dick Award and the 2013 Kitsch's Golden Tentacle Award. Anne's novella, The Enclave, won the 2017 British Science Fiction Association Award for short fiction. And her story, All I Asked For, which she wrote for our fiction series, was shortlisted for the British Science Fiction Award for Best Short Story of 2020 and was also included in the Best British Science Fiction 2020 anthology. Her writing career began in journalism, and her articles has appeared in The Guardian, New Scientist, International Herald Tribune, and Geographical, among others. And last, but certainly not least, we have Vincent Chong, who is a freelance illustrator and designer living in the UK. Since 2004, he has worked for clients around the world on a wide variety of projects, ranging from book and magazine illustrations to concept art for film and TV. Vincent has been a recipient of multiple British Fantasy Awards and also a World Fantasy Award for Best Artist. So I'm very, very pleased to have all of these esteemed speakers with us on the panel today, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation this afternoon. So I'm going to kick off this panel discussion by asking Keith, as the editor of this series, what attracted you to the project and what were the main challenges? You're on mute, Keith.
First lesson, I'll unmute myself. I think one of the things that appealed to me about the project was the crossover between fiction writers, art, and people actively researching in the field and trying to brainstorm ideas together and see what came out of it. It's unlike anything that I've worked on before, and it just seemed like a fascinating project to pick up and run with and see what came out of it.
Yeah, that's true, because in the early stages we were brainstorming together about ideas for stories and where to take things. It's been very collaborative in that sense, which has been really nice. Has there been any challenges with the project as far as you're concerned?
There were all kinds of challenges with it. I mean, the first challenge that we had was simply logistical, that we wanted to get going and publishing as quickly as possible. And writers and artists are often scheduled years in advance with deadlines. And so it was quite a juggling act to make sure that we hit the target each month to have story and artwork ready. But we achieved that, which was nice. But I think the creative challenges were the most interesting in just trying to make sure that we met the brief, which was to cover the range of subject areas that FCC work in, and make sure that, I mean, when we started the project, the whole pandemic thing was just about starting. And then it all kicked off as we were developing ideas. And the danger was that we'd end up with 12 pandemic stories, which we didn't want to do because we wanted to cover all the other areas and try to imagine what the world would be like in 5, 10, 20 years' time, which was particularly difficult when we didn't know what the world was going to be like in 5 weeks' time over the last year and a half.
Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting time to be doing a science fiction project when you feel like you're actually living in a science fiction story yourself.
It has. It's affected, I mean, all of us as science fiction writers, yeah, even if we're setting stories hundreds of years in the future, we still need to extrapolate from now to then. And when the world was changing so rapidly, it made everything very difficult for us.
Yeah, certainly. I'm going to explore. We have seen a range of themes explored within the stories, and they have addressed things like virtual reality, wearable technology, mass surveillance, use of algorithms for diagnosis of illnesses, among other things. And I'd like to explore some of these themes with each of the authors in a bit more depth. And I think I'm going to start with Anne. So your three stories are unique in a way in the series, in that they follow the same family or couple across all three stories. And they follow them across a time span from when, in the first story, the female narrator is expecting her first and only child, which for safety reasons has been transferred from her womb into a baby bag or an artificial womb, partly for reasons of her being an older mother. And there the baby will gestate outside of the body until birth. And subsequent stories then touches on separation anxiety, both when the daughter is a young child and then in the third story when she has grown up and actually moved out of home. So I think that the way I see it, one of the themes in your stories is around the separation that technology can create, whether that is the physical separation of not being able to carry your own baby to term and having that done artificially, or as explored in the second story, where we see the sort of disconnect that can be experienced through the use of virtual consultations with a doctor. So I wonder if this separation or disconnect is something that concerns you with regards to technological advancements in this space.
Yes, it is. It's separation or fear of separation and separation anxiety. In the first story, the mother, who I don't name, the mother is very much... she doesn't really want to go ahead with this, what I call migration of the baby, of the fetus to the artificial womb. And the knock-on effect of that through the subsequent stories is really concerns her mental health as much as anything. So although this wonderful technological breakthrough has come about, really aimed at helping babies who are born super premature, that's the aim of this technology, to give them a higher chance of survival. But the knock-on effect is that it's rolled out to a greater range of pregnant mothers. And the net effect of that is that it probably isn't taken into consideration when the technology is being developed, the long-term implications for the mothers. And that's one of the reasons why I don't name the mother, because the medical profession's main concern seems to be always with the baby. And she's pretty much seen as a bystander almost.
In researching the story, were you did you know about this technology beforehand, or where the technology was at this point in time?
Yes, some years ago I read a kind of popular science book by geneticist Dr. Arati Prasad. She wrote a non-fiction work called Like a Virgin, How Science is Redesigning the Rules of Sex. And she was really looking at the state of research probably in 2013 it was. And so I was able to read that book and see possibilities, springboards for fictional stories. And then I incorporated a lot of that into my novel, Dreams Before the Start of Time. But since then, obviously the research has progressed, and I became aware a couple of years ago that the possibilities of these baby bags or biobags could only be about 10 years away in terms of human fetuses. And so I took the opportunity of this fictions project to write within that new technological possibility to say, well, what would happen if you could migrate a baby that's, say, 20 weeks, 22 weeks to this artificial womb? But then, of course, as a science fiction writer, I'm looking for not only the upside, but also the downside, and how there could be unintended consequences. For example, for older mothers, would they be pressurized to go ahead with migrating the baby? Or if there's a family that's regarded as a chaotic family, if the mother's drinking or taking drugs, would her baby be migrated even by court order? Or even with a termination? How would the medical profession react to that, knowing that the baby could be saved at 18 weeks? So these are the kind of issues I kind of wanted to explore. The obvious upsides in saving new fetuses, but also the downsides of how it could be adopted, how it could be rolled out. Which I don't know, perhaps some of the listeners will wonder who makes these decisions and who thinks about these things. Is it up to the scientist to consider these possibilities, or is it up to the likes of me and the other writers in the project to kind of see or predict where it could go?
Yeah. And I think that is, this story is a really good example of the kind of ethical dilemmas, because we can see parallels already with the technology that is there. And if you're looking at IVF and things like that, that would have been science fiction not too long ago. Mm. So there are some definite interesting ethical issues there. I'm going to move on, because one of the things that you were saying were around, as a sci-fi author, to also look at the downsides. And I'm going to move on to Steve now, because Steve, your first story, Goodbye, is perhaps one of the few in our series where the technology described, which is use of virtual reality during a living funeral in your case, is actually a very positive one, and is used to enrich the experiences of the participants and perhaps even bring them closer together rather than to create this separation. So I wonder if you could just comment on how you see the potential benefits of this type of technology.
I've always been struck by how in this country we have a rather distant, stiff upper lip, slightly cold attitude to death and dying and care for people who are in terminal illnesses. I've had certain experiences in my life, as I'm sure everybody has, which have really brought home things that most people can't think about or don't want to think about, or just really struggle to think about. And I think partly this is a cultural thing. I think Britain is a particularly bad country for thinking about these things and actually talking about them. We're incredibly bad at talking about stuff like this. So when Keith approached me with this fantastic project, which I must say I've absolutely loved doing, it's been a real eye-opener, fantastic. Almost straight away, this was one of the first things that I wanted to write about. And I think you're right. I think even though technically virtual reality is a technology which has a lot of distance implied in it, if you have that emotional heart, which is usually family, but not always family, then I think technology can actually accentuate that. So what I wanted to do was present a very British scenario, an old man, or oldish man, who, like many British families, has not been able to talk to his children very well. I think this is particularly a problem for men. I think women are kind of not trained, but are encouraged to talk and to see talking as a beneficial, just normal thing. I think actually men are somehow trained not to do that. That was partly why I chose a male main character. I wanted this to be a man, to say it's okay for men to do this. And then I wanted to make it a British scenario, because I just feel really strongly that in Britain we don't talk about this stuff. And I think I think it does bring the family together. Keith actually helped me. My ending wasn't quite the ending of the published story, and Keith, who I've worked with for many years now, saw something at the end of the story which just helped put the icing on the cake, as it were, and just accentuate the fact that this family is coming together and that technology can do this. But we really need to have these conversations in Britain. This is why the FCC thing has been so fantastic. We've really put the emphasis on care and human connection.
Yeah, and I think it's really nice also to have this positive focus, because I think often around data and technology we can be a bit scared, and I think rightly the kind of the potential drawbacks are brought up, but your story is a very warm one, albeit bittersweet, but it's a very positive one. And I think I just wonder, sci-fi is often quite dystopian, so I just wonder if it was a conscious decision to make this as a sort of a positive story.
Well, yes, it was actually. I've had the idea. I'm old enough to actually have some kind of personal connection with the 60s. So I've had this idea of, I personally still believe in peace and love. It sounds, I kind of slightly feel a bit odd saying that now, but why not? I mean, these are not things from the past, and I just felt it was just in my mind a really sort of tragic image that we could lose contact with, albeit a very naive, raw, first exploration of love and peace in a globalized world. I just felt it would be so sad that these images, these concepts could just leave human experience forever. So that is bittersweet, I grant you. So yeah. That was actually quite a difficult story to write, because I also have struggled with this issue. So that was a difficult story to write for me.
Well, it's a great story, like all the stories in the series. So thank you very much, Stephen. I'm going to move on to Liz. One common feature in your 3 stories is the use of wearable tech. I think it's a bracelet across all 3 stories, actually. And this, of course, is something that we are quite familiar with these days, with the use of Fitbits and so on. But I think it's fair to say that in your stories, this has kind of been taken to the extreme. So we're looking at wearable tech that is used for mass surveillance or monitoring, and with consequent restrictions imposed on people's lives. So I'm wondering, is this development something that you have thought about or that concerns you, or why did you choose those kind of themes?
Yes, wearables is something that concerns me, because my sort of long-term academic background, and this is dating back to the 80s, and I haven't really picked it up since then, it was in artificial intelligence. I did a master's in cognitive science when a lot of this stuff was really science fictional. And over the last 20 years, there's been a hiatus in AI, and then it's sort of taken off again with big data, with some of the new technology. And I know many people who love their Fitbit and do the sort of tracking and so on. And I think that's great, and they get a lot out of it. But I'm not myself an adopter of wearable tech, because I do feel that the surveillance technology it's not out of hand, but it's as Charlie Stross, who is a very good science fiction writer, who's not involved with this project, once said, it's not what it does now, but it's the infrastructure in place for what might happen in the future. And one of my concerns about wearables, because I write at the moment an awful lot about health insurance across the world, is whether this could be sold on to, for example, your health insurer. If we lose the NHS, if we have to go on to private health insurance, your tracking bracelet is sending all that information to somewhere. How does that affect your premiums? Are you going to have to pay more if you have a certain condition? What if you wanted to hide a condition? What if you were actually defrauding your insurance company? What would happen then? What would the ramifications of that be? And I think it's really interesting to explore these kinds of things now, before they really start being a problem. But definitely with the way that some of the comments about the NHS from people like Dido Harding, who is potentially in line to run it. And from others, the way that it is going, we seem to be taking a little bit of a step backwards in terms of the two-tier private public healthcare system. So part of my thinking was really to see how wearables are going to impact that. And also I wanted to explore it in terms of status, because this is very important. Symbols are really important to me. And what if you can't afford this kind of wearable technology? What if it's not imposed upon you, but you could choose it? What does that say about your economic status? What does that say about your social status? And that sort of thing I thought was really interesting to, potentially explore in this particular context.
Yeah, and I think these are some of the issues that are increasingly being discussed, aren't they, around privacy and about how aware people are of what their data is actually used for. So it's they are very useful conversations to have, and I think that taking them to the extreme in the way that you have done really shows where this kind of could follow in the future, I guess.
Yes.
Going back to Keith, one of the themes in your stories is that of gaming the system. So in one story, we meet a young woman who is in need of an operation, and it becomes clear as we read the story that she is probably never going to be able to get this because of her circumstances that feeds into the algorithm that is used to determine her place on the waiting list for such treatment, and she is just never going to be high enough priority. And eventually in the story, she finds a way of faking a new identity and finding a new way to sort of bump herself up the list, so gaming the system in that way. And in another of your stories, you're dealing more directly with gaming through the lens of looking at gambling addiction and problematic gambling. So I'm wondering what it is about this idea of gaming the system that interests you when we're thinking about future technology developments.
I think one of the benefits of using science fiction to explore these kind of subjects is that we can take things to an extreme. And so, for instance, the first story where the young woman's not going to get her operation because she doesn't score enough points on the system, that's almost satire. It's an exaggeration of where we might be, or at least I hope it is. But if you look around and you talk about rationing operations, particularly in the last year when, for all kinds of good reasons, operations have been limited, every day the healthcare professionals are making really difficult decisions about who gets the treatment, who gets the operations. And so it's a way of taking that and putting a magnifying glass on it. And also the flip side of that is that there are people, if there's ever a system like that, there are people who are going to try to take advantage. There are people who are going to position themselves in the middle and say, oh, I can get you this or I can get you that. And it's a way, for me, it's a way of highlighting unfairnesses in the system and irregularities and just exploring those kinds of issues. And I think exaggerating things often highlights that more effectively than just straight reporting of them.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually going to move on into a little bit, talking a bit more about the benefits of exploring health and care issues through fictions. But I first want to go on to Vincent, who provided all the amazing artwork for this story, really beautiful imagery. And I wanted to ask you, how do you see the role of this kind of imagery in bringing home the messages of these stories?
Well, I think it just it makes it easier to visualize, where we're going with this kind of thing. I think sometimes when you're dealing with abstract concepts or, like dry scientific articles, the layperson, sometimes it can be quite hard to grasp, these concepts and what the potential problems might be with them. So I think, together with the stories, the idea of storytelling and then creating these images to go along with that, I think it helps us, make a more, emotional connection with these themes and these ideas. And I think for, you know, just the average person on the street. It will let them sort of give them a way into understanding these issues a lot more than just say quoting facts or statistics and dry data at them.
Yeah, I was wondering, in coming up with these images, some of things that do not exist yet, were you working together with the authors in trying to bringing their concepts to life, so to speak, or is it just your imagination?
Yeah, well, it was very much a collaborative process. It was quite difficult at times because with the scheduling, as Keith mentioned earlier, just to get everything published on time. For some of these images, I was working on them before the stories were actually written. So I had to rely on the authors to give me an idea of, you know, what they were going to be writing about and what potential imagery I could use. And so, you know, as I was, you know, working on sketches and ideas, sometimes I would have to change direction as the authors fed back to me developments in their stories. You know, like maybe they've changed the central idea or themes, and, you know, I had to adapt to that.
Well, like I said, the artwork is really beautiful, and I think for the anthology, which I'll talk again about at the end, being able to see all of it together with the stories, it really brings the whole thing together. So very, very pleased with your contribution in that respect as well. So talking a little bit more about the benefits of storytelling in creative endeavors like this, just reminding people to put the comments, put questions in the question box if you have any for the authors, by the way. But we talked a little bit earlier about storytelling and how this can benefits, but I guess I wonder, what do you feel are the benefits of using fiction as opposed to facts? So say, for example, that we could have done a series of literature reviews exploring all of the technology that has been explored within the stories and doing a sort of very factual account of that. And I think we've touched a bit already on the benefits of this, but what do you see the benefits being in using fiction in this sense? And I think I'll put that to Stephen first.
So my story, Genomancer, addresses this directly. Basically, I feel that to pick up what you were saying before, actually the dystopian possibilities of where human beings are now with technology are really serious. I find myself getting increasingly pessimistic about how the digital world, the online world, and social media in particular are really affecting people actually physically. There is a lot of evidence now from people like Dr. Mary Aiken, for instance, and other researchers, that actually social media and the digital world are affecting the brain development of children, which I personally find horrifying. I can't believe that there's so little research on this. This is like a completely unmoderated social experiment that is going on across the world, and our children don't know that they're part of that. So I think we have to really, the reason I wrote Genomancer was to really say that in this field, in the medical field, we cannot counter fake beliefs and fake information and fake news with just facts. We have to counter them with stories and narratives based on facts. And I think this is something that the media in particular, I think, is still kind of struggling with. I think there's this idea that that because we are all children of science, especially in the West, that is the basis of how we should be countering misinformation and beliefs that are clearly irrational. I just felt that with that story in particular, it was really important to actually have two narratives, one of which was the untrue narrative, the narrative about that we are the slaves to our genes, which is a really attractive narrative for certain types of people who, there's a gene for this, there's a gene for that, there's a gene for the other. That's not how it works. So that false narrative is countered by a true narrative. It's the narrative of the visiting character who comes in, who actually has been involved in research on Alzheimer's and has her own personal story to counter the fake story. So that was a story I really, really wanted to write, because that to me is the battle that we are now heading for, and we've got to get it right. We absolutely have got to get it right.
Yeah, and I wonder then, do you think, or are you saying that storytelling could be an effective way of presenting these facts, as it were? Because I think one of the things that has raised criticism over the last year, in particular during the pandemic, is the facts kind of get drowned out because they are boring and dry and statistics based, whereas fake news stories or anti-vaccination stories or other things, for example, are done in a more narrative way and draw on anecdotes and so on. So stories could be used for the good, for the powers of good in spreading the messages.
I absolutely do believe that. In fact, I think that storytelling is not just an effective way, it may be the only effective way, because, you know, as many, I've just recently finished reading the Will Storr book, The Art of Storytelling, and it just emphasizes so much how human beings are creatures of narrative. We even tell our own life stories. Our memories are not facts that we can retrieve, you know, about stuff that happened when we were 6 or stuff that happened when we were 12 or 18. We actually have made our own narrative of our own lives, and that is what we use to make our identities. It is what we do as conscious individuals, and so we absolutely have to rely on that to counter misinformation and fake news. And this is absolutely true in the medical field, as in any other fields. So I think we should rely on other stuff as well, but I think storytelling and the use of narrative may actually be the best way, not the only way, but vitally important.
Yeah, great, thank you. If I could turn to Liz and exploring this the power of storytelling and dealing with difficult topics. So I'm thinking particularly about your story, Infectious, which is set in a future where illnesses or communicable diseases are essentially eradicated, which has led, this and other things has led to a society where risk is almost eliminated and people are living risk-free, but consequently also appear to be getting quite bored. And some people in this scenario are resorting to extreme measures, for example, buying infectious diseases, infecting themselves with infectious diseases from dark labs in order to experience something. And I think it's a brave story to write in the middle of a global pandemic. And I just wondered if you have any comment on that, about using storytelling to address issues that are difficult and that may be a little bit taboo in the current context.
Yes, I think I'd like to basically fully endorse everything Stephen's just said about narrative. I feel that he has absolutely hit the nail on the head. I live in the centre of anti-vax COVID denialism in Glastonbury. It's very much a feature of the New Age wellness industry, which seems to have gone right down the conspiracy theorist rabbit hole when it comes to COVID with vaccinations. We've been batting up to it for a few years with the anti-vax thing. And I think there are, they think about 12 influencers who are responsible for promoting these false narratives. They're doing so for commercial gain. And in Infectious, the driving force behind this, as the driving force behind any fashion, is commercial gain. You're absolutely correct in that the people in the story are bored. And I feel that there is very definitely a crossover into our own society at the moment, and that there is, unfortunately, quite a small segment, but a loud segment of the population who really either are scared of reality as it is. There's a nasty bug out there, which in the wrong demographic, it could kill you. That's a nasty thought. We've all got to lock down. They don't like that. And they have put an enormous amount of emotional investment into a series of symbols which don't really, in a way, even have anything to do with COVID itself. So wearing a mask is seen as symbolizing being muzzled by the state. You know, this is an exciting thing to happen to you. It's quite boring to put a medical mask on and go around Tesco's to do your shopping because you might catch something. It's much more exciting to feel that the deep state is trying to control your actions. It's much more exciting to think that the deep state is sending children to Mars to be injected with adrenochrome, which is one of the wackier forms of belief in QAnon. And I kind of think that these things operate like cults. There's a move away from the idea of a cult as an organization which people physically belong to. They go to meetings, they listen to a charismatic leader. QAnon is particularly interesting because it's an internet-based self-radicalization program. And QAnon was sort of just getting traction when I started writing these stories. And I didn't really touch on that so much, but it definitely fed its way into infectious. In the sense that if you are bored and if risk has been eliminated, how do you get your excitement and how do you get attention? And extreme fashion is a way of getting attention and making yourself stand out in what is potentially a bland culture. These people take it far too far because as science fiction writers, we are engaging in thought experiments. So the factual narrative, which is that people don't do this right now. They do other weird things for their health, but they don't do that. This is a thought experiment to take it, as far as it perhaps possibly can be taken in terms of illness as a disease. And I think this does tie into a lot of the sort of ideas around health that are floating around in the alternative community, who are trying to speak out against mainstream medicine because they see it as something that's run by some dark cabal somewhere. This is a terribly exciting thought, but it's not true. But it's a very compelling narrative. And going back to what Stephen was saying, this narrative is much more compelling than saying to people, you just wear your mask and socially distance, and you'll probably be all right. Facts and stats do not cut it. And it is, it's who controls the narrative. Sorry, that was a long and rambling way of saying there's a lot of very interesting things floating around the idea of health, wellness, and illness at the moment. And Infectious was looking at one strand of that.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great story. We were not nervous exactly, but I think it was the only story that felt that it was a little bit controversial in the middle of it, which is great because that's what you need to inspire debate, I think. If I can move on to Anne, we touched earlier a bit about how your stories address some of the concerns that are maybe a bit more difficult to discuss around fertility and so on. So I just wonder, following the same theme around the benefit of storytelling around this, if you could expand on that a little bit more in relation to the difficult topics.
Yes, I think with technology, I think when I write science fiction, I do try and situate it within ordinary family situations. And I think with storytelling, for most writers, it starts with an element of daydreaming, in that this is the kind of thing that most scientists perhaps don't have time for, most researchers, I always assume, are primarily concerned with solving an immediate problem, such as the issue of super premature babies. Whereas for me, I'm sat back, I'm staring out the window and daydreaming about, what are the implications for this? What are the possibilities? And for me, I do love to kind of just take ordinary families where the technology is there, it's almost ubiquitous, and how is that affecting relationships? And I felt with my second story, where the main character is having a virtual doctor's appointment, almost like an experience in Second Life, where you have your avatars. You have an avatar of yourself and of your doctor. And I felt in that story it was an issue of trust. And again, we're getting into this whole issue of with AI, if we're dealing virtually with medical professionals, for me, I was thinking, who am I talking to? Is this a doctor I'm talking to, or is this some school leaver, or is it a medical student? So for me, I felt some of the issues, especially in the first two stories, were to do with this relationship between patients and medical professionals, and where is the trust there, and where can it go wrong? And again, this links into what Liz was just saying about when the trust breaks down. That's when all the conspiracy theories come in and people go down other avenues, thinking they know what's going on. So fiction, for me, fiction writing is primarily about taking the time to think about where the technology is going, which the professionals may not feel it's their job to do. They may be stepping outside their professional remit to start saying, oh, well, this could mean in 40 years' time that fetuses are being migrated against the parents' wishes. So yeah, that's what I see as my job, really, daydreaming and looking for unintended consequences, whether they're positive or negative.
Yeah. I'm thinking you've all clearly done research in preparation of your stories of the technology that is out there. And I'm going to ask you about where you think, how far behind we are these future scenarios, if you're thinking about specific technologies from your stories. But I think I will go to Vincent first and ask, we were talking earlier about how you collaborated together with the authors on this, but I'm wondering if you also have been looking at the technology that is out there already to get inspiration from what is available and how that might develop in the future.
Well, I think one of the surprising things I found when I was doing this was that a lot, when the authors came to me with their ideas of this technology, and then I started looking for imagery around this sort of technology, a lot of it was was already at its beginning stages, like the artificial wombs, and sent me some great reference material of articles about where how this is already starting and how it's developing. So I was able to adapt that and make it fit into the framework for Anne's story. And a lot, with the VR stuff, again, there's a lot of developments in not just in the medical realms, but in gaming and all that, which all feeds into this technology. And I think it's just speeding up. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this thing become reality sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, Keith, if you wanted to reflect on the technology in your story. I'm thinking particularly of the technology in Carefree, but you might have other thoughts on your other stories as well, and how far behind we are in that sense.
I think one of the interesting things about the fictional approach is that we don't know how far we are behind the technology. Going back to what you were saying about we could have just done a literature review. I think one of the big differences is that the more academic approach, you can't help, the default is to think in straight lines and to predict where we're going to be in 5 years or 10 years' time. Fiction writers sidestep that. I mean, if you look at history, history doesn't move in straight lines. We're surprised all the time. 2 years ago, we would never have recognized the world we're in now just because a pandemic came along. We knew a pandemic might come along at some point, but we didn't know how that would impact the world and our lives until it actually happened. And so I genuinely don't know. Some of the technologies that we've explored in this series literally just round the corner. some of them are very speculative and quite likely would never happen in the way that we've discussed them in the stories. But the role of fiction is to ask, what if this happened, rather than to predict that something's going to happen at a particular time. And I think that's one of the great benefits we've had from this project.
Yeah, thank you, Keith, and thank you, everyone. I'm going to move on to the questions from the audience now. So we have one question for Liz. A question following Liz's great comments on the compelling and exciting features of the conspiracy narratives. In this case, how do we construct exciting counter stories, as Stephen suggested, that effectively counter those? If we imagine desirable and good uses of, for example, AI, which narrative facilitate developments and use of technologies in desirable direction, in your view, for everyone? Starting with Liz.
Okay, well, that's a fascinating question, actually, and it's a really good point, because developing factual narratives tends to be more, it's constrained by fact, obviously, and that's really the problem. I think Stephen was alluding to this. Now, one possibility is heroes, although I don't think some of them would be terribly happy with that, actually. I think Chris Whitty is who's been in the news this week, is the UK's medical advisor, would possibly be really unhappy with it. And that suggestion started because the woman who developed the Oxford vaccine was cheered with a standing ovation at Wimbledon this week, prior to the tennis players. And I think one of the possible narratives is to big up the exciting story of how science actually progresses. My doctorate's in the history and philosophy of science, and some of the stories of how scientific discoveries are made and how medical discoveries are made are really intriguing and are really full of incident and colour. And I think perhaps rather than relying on, a stat and a diagram and, a series of rather downbeat predictions, perhaps we should be bigging that up a little bit more.
Yeah. And I think I posed the same question to Stephen, if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah. I agree with what Liz said. I think we have to really focus on people. It's a truism, but stories are about people. I think we have to be really wary about creating stories and thinking about stories and designing stories that are based on heroes. I think the idea of the hero is a peculiarly male idea, and I think it's a peculiarly Western idea. I think actually then that might be that could be a trap that many writers fall into. Not necessarily writers of novels or fictions, but actually, film script writers, people like that. I think what we have to do is emphasize people acting together, particularly in communities. It's so easy to forget that we are British, but Britain is 60 or 70 million people. That's impossible to there's no connection between 70 million people and a human being. If we imagine our narrators, our actors, our people with agency in communities, and if we have a 50% male and 50% female, I think that is a far more useful, helpful, and dare I say it, realistic way to progress.
Thank you, Stephen. And I think one of your stories have been touching on this on the patriarchal way that these technologies are sometimes developed and what can go amiss when that is the case.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah. I have another question, which is for everyone. Again, did you collaborate with any scientists or researchers within the fields your narratives are drawn from? And if so, what were their reaction to stories and the ethical questions raised? Maybe go to Keith with that one.
I can't speak for the individual authors on their particular stories, but a key part of the process for in the early stages of the whole project was that we got together all of the writers and Vinny as the artist got together with the team at FCC and had an online discussion area where we did a lot of brainstorming of topics to explore, possible story scenarios, future scenarios, And then following on from that, there were pointers, particularly from the researchers' side, of where we can go to research those stories. And I know in my case, I did go off and follow those leads, but it was more the starting point in those discussions that sent me off in my own direction. I don't know what the others did.
I know, Anne, you were saying you were doing research dating back to reading. What about collaborating with scientists?
I'm not sure I've actually collaborated, but I did have a very helpful conversation. It was part of a radio interview with an Australian scientist, Matt Kemp, who'd been working with researchers in Tokyo at the Tohoku University Hospital. And so that conversation in itself directly led to the stories that I wrote for this fiction series. So it can be, for me, it's either reading books or it's going to talks at book festivals by scientists, you know, presenting their own non-fiction works. In terms of collaboration, I might arrange a meeting to talk over ideas. I did that with Dr. Arati Prasad. You know, I bounced a few ideas for fictional scenarios off her, and so that was great fun. It's always good to have that kind of feedback without feeling that you have to justify your stories. You know, it's not like getting your homework marked. You know, it's like, oh no, that would never happen. But no, it's really nice to have those conversations and get feedback as well.
Thank you, Anne. I'm going to try and quickly fit in one final question for Vincent, which is, how do you think the style of images emphasizes an underlying frame of a given technology? For example, if you portray an artificial womb as a slick white cocoon that emphasizes the cool, high-tech nature of it. If one portrays cables and tubes, this evokes images of a medical negative hospital image. I wonder whether you can reflect on the importance of aesthetics in creating these images and imagination about the future.
Well, I think in terms of this project, there were a few things I had to take into account. So I had to illustrate the content of the story very early on as well. I looked at the way that FCC had branded themselves and the color palettes and the things. So in my images, I used a lot of the blue tones that were used by the charity, and some of the secondary colors like the yellows and the reds and everything. And while some of the stories are more dystopian, like this is infectious, I didn't ever want to push it into sort of a hopeless dystopian future, fantasy future. And it was more about hope, really. All the images, and had to focus very much on the people within. So if you look at the images I've done, I think you'll find that they're centered more on the characters rather than the tech itself. And I think that is the anchor for all these stories, how this future technology will impact people and their lives.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to end on, actually, and we do have to end because we are coming right to the end of the hour. So I want to thank all of you so much for contributing both to the project over the last year and to this panel discussion this afternoon. It's been absolutely fascinating and really interesting talking to you today. And just to reiterate what I was saying earlier, that we now have this compendium which contains all of the 12 stories from the series, and it's available for download from the Future Care Capital website, which should be on your screen in front of you now. So please go and have a look at that and get in touch with us and let us know what you think. So thank you again to all of the authors. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in the audience, perhaps at our future Care Capital event. Thank you so much and goodbye.